So I think it's a good time to start this live stream. It's been like 84 years. It's been a long time since I showed myself to the public. So welcome to, well, I have to take care of the new microphone. So welcome to the first live stream in ages, the first live stream of 2024. I had this spontaneous idea of going live both on YouTube and on X or on Twitter, interestingly, because I also got a certain following over there after lots of interesting debates and discussions. And I also wanted to restart or continue the podcast by basically replying to your most asked questions, but I thought to myself, why not simply go live and then also take your spontaneous reactions and maybe some spontaneous questions that you might have, so we can be a little more flexible. That being said, yeah, a lot of things have changed since the last time I showed myself. My hair is certainly receding. I wouldn't say that I would be, or that I am burned out, but certainly stressed out for the past few months. I think that those following me on social media know what I'm talking about. So it's been a turbulent time. But I just finished the new video documentary about the Karahanid Empire like 2 days ago and uploaded it for the members and finally made it public to the rest of the world yesterday. And yeah, that was a huge sigh of relief from my part because it was exactly 50 minutes long. It was supposed to be 25 minutes long. And it's just that I didn't really want to leave out any important details, so I just kept going, kept going, kept going. Guests didn't really know when to stop. And then I said to myself, you finally have to get that, excuse my French, goddamn video out. It's got to be, finished sometime. The people are waiting. So yeah, the same thing applies to my book. But then again, I'm not here to talk about those topics. I simply want to take your questions. So maybe let us gather the community first and go ahead. Say something about you. Or rather, give your reactions to what I just said. Yeah, you don't have to say anything about yourself. Lots of you people who have become part of the Can't Stand community. Wait a minute, I have to do something about this microphone. Okay, so I hope you can understand me rather clear. Yeah, the last time I did a live stream, I think we had like 25,000 subscribers, and I just looked at the numbers this morning. Can't Stand now has like 72,550 subscribers. So a lot of new people joining in. Interestingly, a lot of people, a lot of new followers from the Anglo-Saxon countries, from the United States, from the UK, Canada, Australia. So huge welcome to all of you. It's really cool to see how international this community has gotten, which used to be my main goal when I started Can't Stand like 4.5 years ago. Yeah, it took a long time, but finally we're here. So thank you everyone who has joined in. Alaikum salam to everyone. Esenlik. Good evening. Yeah, I finally got the Anglos to care about Turkic history, which of course wasn't my goal at all. It wasn't my mission, but mission accomplished nonetheless. Yeah, so the first question asked here is if I could at some point do a video about the Yochen. I could, but they are so far ahead of everything else that I want to cover right now, on the timeline. Maybe sometime in the future. I actually do have I won't really spoil too much, but there's someone who is very affluent in the history of Mongolia in general, especially the era of Genghis Khan and his successors. And we are actually planning on making a video series about Mongolia before the Mongols, or let me rather say Mongolia before Genghis Khan and this big Mongol empire. So we are slowly drifting into this eastern direction, but it's gonna take time. Yes, welcome to Zafer Karaaslan. I think that you, my dear brother, you are also in the podcast business, if I remember correctly. You also asked me to be a guest on your podcast, and I wanted to have you as a guest on my podcast. So definitely let's keep that in mind. Well, okay, that's awesome. You basically had the same thought as I do. In general, I am absolutely open to collaboration, which I wasn't for like the first 3 years of Can't Stand. I'd love to work with other people who are in the content creation business, although this isn't really a business for me, it's just a hobby. A little bit of revenue, of course. But yeah, I mean, everyone brings something to the table. And I think it would be great to invite people or, to cooperate. For example, doing such a live stream with someone else or, being a guest on the podcast. There are also a few guests for my podcast. I had mentioned that many weeks ago, or many months ago, from the academic field, where I already have conducted the interviews or I'm going to, which is still in planning. So, yeah. There's one thing that I have to get out of my system. Um, I'd say that I'm rather doing well regarding video production, but I'm not really fond of video production anymore. This receding hairline has not just been caused by that, but I feel like when I work on something in my, Premiere Pro and the Adobe software, I work on a video for like a month. It will take at least 3 more months away from my lifetime. It's just too stressful. Also doing all the research, writing the script, bringing everything together. I, of course, make a lot of use of artificial intelligence. I guess you can see that in the photos and the images that I use, but I fine-tuned most of that, and I think that it's actually a rather good thing. But it really takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. So I'd also be open for someone out there, maybe to join my team, I guess, voluntarily. Yeah, but again, this is something in the future. I'm still nothing but a small content creator for the time being. Yeah, actually, I think that I could open the list of questions that I wrote down recently. What I also did in the past year is make a new style of maps, and I'm a huge fan of, I mean, it might sound a bit corny, but I'm a huge fan of grand strategy games. And what I really love about those video games is that you can basically skip to any year within that time frame, for example, in the Middle Ages, and you can see all these small territorial changes taking place between all these states, the bordering regions. And I said to myself, I jump so much back and forth in my videos on this timeline. Why not just make a map for like every 10 or at least every 20 or 50 years and just show even areas that I'm not going to talk about directly in the videos, which again also takes a lot of time. But just in case, I have prepared a lot of maps. Some of them I used in the video, and when I go to these questions, I'm gonna open those maps. You know, I don't really know a lot about streaming, but I do know that I can basically make my head smaller and appear on this side and the screen. Yeah, so I hope that you guys won't mind. All right, so you continue asking questions. I'm gonna try to answer all of them, most of them. One of the most asked questions on my channel, not just recently, but since I uploaded my first video, is about the relations between the Göktürk people, the Turks, and the Oğuz Turks, or the Oghuz Turks, as they were probably called originally. If you've seen any of my videos, or most of my videos, if you watched any of the videos, actually, you will notice that I talk about the Göktürks, that I mention them basically all the time. I don't really do that because I would be so in love with the Göktürks, although I do think that, they used to be quite an interesting people. But because I think that they're important and they have been underrated for a very long time throughout history books, even in a certain Turkish country, in my honest opinion. And I just wanted to get the word out a few years ago when I made these first Göktürk documentaries and longer documentaries, even up to 90 minutes. And the Göktürks are the key, the way I see it, between late antiquity, between late antiquity and the medieval period in that Eurasian region. And they are key to understanding why, for example, Turkic peoples suddenly appeared outside of their original homeland settlement, why they migrated into Europe, into Eastern Europe, to the Black Sea region, into the Near East, and finally, into Anatolia. And it is difficult to make a connection between modern Turkish empires, for example, and the Göktürks, because so much time has passed. There's such a wide, vast geographical distance between one place and the other. But the Göktürk empires, both of them, basically initialized and were catalysts for this Turkic migration. And just when the Göktürk period ended, a lot of new people suddenly appeared on the map, and one of them was the Oğuz Turks. And the Oğuz Turks are a very special case, because out of most Turkic peoples and that emerged in antiquity or the Middle Ages, the Oğuz Turks remained loyal to their ancient cause, their ancient traditions for the longest time. And the Oğuz Turks are also one of the few Turkic people that simply remained where their settlement used to be. There was one distinct period in the 750s when a number of, Turkic-speaking, Tengrist, most likely, families banded together, and in that chaos that ensued after the fall of the Second Göktürk Empire, there was basically anarchy in the Eurasian steppe belt, at least in the Eastern Eurasian steppe belt. These families banded together and they thought about, finding a new place to live where they wouldn't be persecuted for any, for whatever case, where they wouldn't fear of being raided by other, of course, Turkic or general steppe peoples. And these people came to be known as the Oghuz Turks, or the Gus, or the Usi in some sources. And I'm going to show that map right now, one of the maps that I spoke about. Which is very, I'd say let's start maybe with, the Göktürk Empire first. Just to get an overview again. So I think that I've shown this map a few times in my videos. And if you just zoom in a little bit, then you're going to see that there's a lot of tribes or groupings that I basically included in this map without an autonomous territory, seemingly. So people that did not rule over an independent state, that maybe didn't even understand the idea of strict national borders or national identities, but which did have distinct identities in comparison to other groups. And one of these groups was the Oghuz. And the Oghuz most likely used to settle in the Altai region. The Altai region, which was also home to the Ashina dynasty, who made this whole thing. And the interesting thing is that in the Orthon inscriptions, which were made during the Second Göktürk Empire, Oghuz are also mentioned, but it is unclear if the Göktürks really meant that Oghuz group, which by now had left the Altai and was slowly moving to the west to the Aral Sea, where they would lastly settle around 750 or 760. It is unclear what they meant by saying Oghuz, because Oghuz, similar to Oghur in the Oghuric languages, could simply mean as much as tribe or society. Or I think not tribe, but rather society consisting of several tribes. That's like a common term and not really a distinct name. For some reason, when the Oghuz basically settled in this area, which was used to be ruled by the Kanga Union, also a Turkic people. They retained that name. They were simply called the Oghuz, so the tribes, the societies. Nothing really special there. And the interesting thing is that they again stayed in this area for like, well, 3 centuries. And the first tribe to leave the Oghuz were actually the Pechenik. You might have heard of these guys, who would basically, well, be repelled by the Oghuz and other Turkic tribes and then migrated all the way over to the Ponto-Caspian steppe, where they were also repelled by the Hazaras, and then they went on. By the way, this map is not completely, it's not really complete. All I did is basically take care of the borders in Central Asia. So these are not the real precise borders, as you can see. And yeah, the Bulgars are shown here because they were repelled by the Magyars, and the Magyars in turn were repelled by the Pechenik. But another part of the Pechenik stayed here in this area. And we know of several sources, for example, in the Divani Lugat by Mahmud al-Kashgari, who made entire lists about these 24 tribes, which were supposedly part of the Oghuz state, which is now formed. One of these tribes, I think in like ranked 19, 19th, I think, was called Pechenik. And yeah, it's very interesting because this supposedly random grouping of Turkic peoples developed an identity that was distinct from the rest. The Pechenik in Europe, for example, slowly adopted Christianity and then Islam. The Gök Turks totally disappeared, basically. The Uyghurs came in their place and they accepted Manichaeism as state religion. They became settled, and more Turkic peoples basically, resigned from their ancient traditions. The only ones that didn't were the Oghuz. Now, what is the relation between Göktürk and Oghuz? I would say that these Oghuz people, even if the Oghuz in the other inscriptions they're referring to something else, these Oghuz people may have been related to the Göktürks. The geographical factor is certainly important, but also the language. And interestingly, there's another grouping which also carried Oghuz in the name. And these are the Dokuz Oghuz, to make it even more complicated. Anyone who can speak a Turkic language knows that Dokuz means 9. So the Dokuz Oghuz are the 9 tribes, the 9 societies. These are also completely different from these Oghuz people. Now, what makes these Oghuz people so interesting? Every major Turkish state or empire that emerged right here in Anatolia, and a lot of states that emerged in the Caucasus, and in the southern Caucasus, Azerbaijan, parts of Iran, for example, like the Seljuk Empire, the Ottoman Empire, those thousands of beyliks in Anatolia, the Akkolno, the Karakolno. They were all descended from one of these 24 Oghuz tribes. So this basically was a melting pot, and for some reason it exploded, and the tribes left in many different areas, except for the east, of course, and they founded their own dynasties, and their descendants did not forget where they came from. So this Oghuz identity or Oghuz identity must have been distinct. Yeah, I just wanted to add that because I have read quite a few research papers that claim that, well, Oghuz is nothing important or serious because it was just a name for tribe. Okay, but political terms or common terms can also evolve into distinct names or identities. The same applies for the name Turk. The Göktürks were not called Göktürks, they were just called Turk or Turk. And this term Turk was applied to other peoples, but most of the time only to those peoples who spoke the same language, a Turkic language, who had similar traditions, who were semi-nomadic, who believed in Tengri, and so on. So, yeah. I don't know if that really answers the question, but there are distinct differences between Oghuz Turks and Göktürks. I do think that they were related somehow, but, anything beyond that is rather speculation. Okay. Yes, Zoltan, thanks for the question. So Zoltan asked me, are you planning to come to Hungary to visit the Ktipi Bugat? I'd love to indeed. Um, yeah, I'd love to. I don't know. I think that the Ktipi, this is like a gathering of a lot of peoples which used to have or still have nomadic traditions, nomadic cultures. And it's like a sort of sports festival, if I understand it correctly. I'd love to come and visit. I think that the Kudultai takes place in August, maybe. Uh, Not sure if I pronounce it correctly. Suha Kagan Köse? May I ask where you're from? Well, my first name is Emre, my last name is Yavuz, so obviously Turkish origins. As Turkish as it gets from the name, I suppose. I was born and grew up in Germany. Wasn't my choice. I can't really complain too much though. I don't have too many complaints. But yeah, one complaint that I have is that I have this, rather, that I cultivated a sort of typical German accent when speaking, not Turkish, but when speaking English. That is a bit embarrassing, and that's also one of the reasons why I wasn't too keen on narrating my own videos. Then again, people tell me that they kind of like my voice, or they certainly like it more than these AI voices, so here we are. Barrier broken, basically. Yeah, Zoltan has a follow-up question. What about a video that only also, I suppose, that only shows movements and changes without narration, showing the flow? So what I suppose you would like to see is a map video, right? So a mapping video, mapping evolution video. I'd like to, but I'm not really that great at making maps. So I know how to make these maps, for example, but I don't really know how to animate them. So it's a nice idea, but I don't think that I have the expertise for that. Oh, oh geez, what a name. The Confederacy of Unpaid and Sad Interns asks, I have a hobby of world building thing I do in my past time, and well, he or she would like suggestions for the steppe area. First thing that you should keep in mind that the steppe did not have dense populations, like at no point in time in general, but there are places within the steppe, settlements, in usually more fertile areas, which indeed could be populated by tens of thousands of people. Just keep in mind that when you do this world building hobby thing or for your project, it could be for a video game, could be for a novel or TV series, that the steppe really needs to appear vast and empty. That's what makes it so frightening, maybe. Yeah, so that's my suggestion to you, basically. Jem Ashokolo asks about the 30 O's. That's a very, very great question. There are different kinds of O's groupings, indeed. 30 O's is similar to the 30 Tatar, for example, that also appear in the Orkun inscriptions. It is difficult to keep them all apart, but I would indeed say that the most distinct groupings that were called O's at any point in time were the O's in the RRC, so basically our ancestors, of the Turkish, many Turkish people, some Turkish people, and the other O's who later settled in eastern Turkestan, a part of which became the Uyghurs later on. So these are the most important, relevant Oghuz groupings for us, I would say. Kaloyan Ivanov wants my opinion on Bulgaria and the Bulgarians. Well, I was quite interested in Bulgarian history, and then I made a video about early Bulgarian history, not the local history of Bulgaria, but of the Bulgar people. And I was kind of taken aback by the reaction. You can see that for yourself if you go to the comment section under my video. I'm used to critique and constructive feedback, even trolling, but I never experienced anything like that. So I would rather not talk about Bulgaria ever again. You know, I hope you understand. But I heard that Bulgaria is actually a very nice place. So I'd never been there, frankly. Well, not a friend. Well, an ex-girlfriend of mine also was of mixed Turkish and Bulgarian origins. I mean, literally, like her mother was of Bulgarian origin and her father was of Turkish origin, and they apparently used to live nearby. Their families used to live in like the same village area in Bulgaria, and yeah, I also think that the most interesting aspect of Bulgarian history is actually the fact how, like in the 9th century and onwards, they really kept their realm or defended their realm rather successfully until the end against the Byzantine or the Eastern Roman Empire. How they also had to deal, for example, with the Magyar invasion and then the Pechenic invasion. So interesting aspects, but nothing that I would touch again on constant. Yeah, so where am I from in Turkey, or Turkey rather? Um, I would say mixed. I won't go into private details, but basically from a lot of parts, how can I say anything without giving anything away from my private life? A bit difficult. Maybe I'm gonna answer that question another time, but for the time being, um, well, my mother's side, indeed, after they had migrated away from some other point in Anatolia, they did indeed live for a few centuries in old Istanbul, so the old Constantinople and Constantinia during Ottoman times. I suppose I could say that, at least from her side, we used to be one of the old original Istanbul, which is also a rare thing today. Most of the people in Istanbul, or at least their parents, grandparents, and so on, they really migrated within the past 50 years into that huge city. Yeah, so then let's continue with the next question. Oh boy, that's gonna get me into trouble perhaps. The question is about Osan and whether Osan was a real person. So the interesting thing about the Oğuz Yapgu is that there's a legend that accompanied Oğuz history, and according to that legend, I'm gonna switch to that other map quickly. According to that legend, the Oğuz state was founded by a young man called Oğuz. And Oğuz Khan, as the name implies, was the ruler, the king or emperor. I guess king would be more appropriate regarding, if you take a look at the size of that state. Um, he was the founder of the eponymous state, and he was also the one who, had sons who then would go on to become independent rulers. And each of his sons would basically establish their own realm. And out of that realm, apparently, according to that legend, appeared these tribes, these 24 tribes that I just talked about like 10 minutes ago. And the story of Oğuz Khan is embedded in the book of Dede Korkut. The book of Oğuz himself, the Oğuz Name, like the real original book, which supposedly existed sometime like 1,000 years ago or 800 years ago, which might have even been not written in that Oğuz Yapgu area, but somewhere in the Caucasus. That Oğuz Name is missing, basically. It's missing in action. It's hasn't been found so far. So his story was embedded into the book of Dede Korkut. And the question is, how real was Oğuz Khan really? Was this a real person or not? Was he a fictional character? Because interestingly, there are no historical documents that ever referred to someone called Oğuz Khan at all. But the story was indeed taken into other sources in like the 15th, 16th century, where, well, let's say serious professional chroniclers, historians, scholars, philosophers took his story or explained part of his story in a way that the reader would think that Oğuz Khan was a real person. So it seems that they also thought of Oğuz Khan having been real, having existed at some point in time. Then there's also the theory that Oğuz Khan was basically a rehash of Metehan or Maudun or Moduchanyu. And Metehan, as he's known in Turkish, was not the founder, but the one who, well, brought the Shungnu state or the Hungnu state, so the state of the great ancient Huns, to power and who expanded this Shungnu state, well, up to Lake Balkhash in the west and to the Kingang Mountains in the east. And Metehan or Moduchanyu has a very interesting story, and it's also a bit mythical, but we do know also from Chinese sources that Moduchanyu really did exist. And the story or the biography of Oğuz Khan is very similar to the biography of Metehan or Moduchanyu. I don't really know what name to use in that case. And that is really interesting because, for example, murdering your own father to take his place, take control of the state, make the state even bigger or more mighty, isn't really an unusual practice within steppe peoples. In my recent video about the Karahanids, that is exactly what happened when Sato killed, well, not his father, but his adopted father, his uncle, who was the Khan at that time, then became Khan himself, basically as the first Muslim Khan within the Karahanid realm. And this is where the Karahanid Khaganate really picked up and then reached its apex. The same happened with the Shungnu. But these two people can be identified through a variety of sources at that time, from other peoples, from other, written in other areas. That doesn't really apply to Oğuz Khan himself. So I would go with the theory to say that Oğuz Khan was a sort of a metaphorical character to explain the backstory of these 24 Oğuz tribes. Yeah, that's about an answer as much as I can give as an answer. Maybe there's some sort of source, some sort of written document that could be the key to the story to unlock what really was or who really was behind Oğuz Khan that we simply haven't found yet or that has been lost in time, which is another huge problem within, especially regarding Turkic history, that so many sources are missing. This applies not just to the Gökturks in 550, but also to Turkic peoples who used, to exist, who existed in like 1000 AD and so on. The more they got into contact with other foreign people, the more we know about them, obviously. And that is because they themselves, most of the time, unfortunately, did not really think about writing down their own history. Or they did, but only fragments survived, or nothing at all. So yeah, it's a lot of speculation involved, unfortunately. I'm not going to give the answer that Oğuz Khan wasn't real. I just think that it was opportunistic to take the story, the biography of the great Moduchanyu, and apply that to the founder, supposedly mythical founder of your state, because this would also elevate your own state. You would be telling this epic story of Oğuz Khan and his sons and so on to the children before, bringing them to bed, so that generations of Oğuz people, regardless of which, to which tribe they belong, would grow up thinking, well, we did have that, we're all kind of descended from the same guy. And yeah, wow, he was mighty and great and had even sort of magical powers and so on. It's a great story. It could have been made up, unfortunately. Yeah, I really have to be careful. I don't want to anger anyone, frankly. Oh, wow, okay, we just got a donation by Gremlin. Thank you very much. He or she asks, would you consider making videos on the peoples of the Tarim Basin like the Toharians or Tocharians? Absolutely. I'm kind of in love with the Tarim Basin or Tarim Basin. I don't really know how you spell it or pronounce it in English. It's basically, guys, it's basically this area, right? It's the area that I leave out in most maps. The Tarim Basin is so important because this is like the place where all these cultures that were connected by the Silk Road, or the Silk Roads rather, collided or met. Of course, mostly due to merchants and traders taking extremely long distances, well, and finally meeting in one of these city-states. Most of these, actually all of these cities that you see here, for a long time in antiquity, even in the Middle Ages, up to the High Middle Ages, I would argue, were independent. They were autonomous. They had their own kingdoms. This is what I meant by saying that on the periphery of the Eurasian steppe belt, you can have areas with higher population density, like for example Kucha or Aksu or Kashgar. These cities are not part of the steppe. Technically, I know, but they're on the periphery. So they were very important for nomadic peoples, that resided in this area. They could be raided, for example, but it was more wise not to raid these cities, but instead to send your own merchants from your nomadic, semi-nomadic society, and then have him trade with the merchants who arrived from China or Rome or the Arab, realm, from Persia and so on, or even from India, and try to make the most of it and then buy off a few nice goods that weren't available, couldn't be produced in the steppe regions, and that was a way to enrich yourself without actually killing anyone, without raiding. So I wouldn't say that it used to be a very peaceful region, because all the states here in the periphery were constantly battling for influence, but in general, it would be a really cool chapter with a focus on economic, cultural history. So yeah, I'm totally open. I don't really know what the other people, what you guys, if you would like to watch that video, I would indeed drift very much apart from steppe and Turkic history. But yeah, when it comes to the Toharians, also very interesting people. I'm open for that, so definitely. The next few videos are gonna concern Turkic states still, so the Pechenek are up next, the Volga Bulgars, the Seljuks, finally the Seljuk Empire. But after that, I would certainly like to return to Eastern Asia, to Eastern Central Asia, take a look at them. Also interesting, if you ask me, are the Tuyurun people. Very few people actually know about the Tuyurun, who basically kept out in this very nice defensive area for like 600 years without being disturbed too much. Also very interesting people. Yes, also thank you for watching the Karahanit video from yesterday. It didn't really have as much views as it should have, in my opinion, but I'm not going to complain. It's still cool that so many people actually watch these 30, 40, now 50-minute videos, even if not all of it. I know that some of you also like to open the video on your device and then listen to it, while it's in the background, while you're just doing something else, I don't know, schoolwork or cleaning your room. Yeah, maybe it is a good idea to actually make such longer videos, maybe minimize the music part a bit, remove the sound effects. So it's also something that I thought about regarding podcast episodes, just to make the same stuff like I have done so far for the videos, but without all these effects and pauses. Yeah, could be a nice, cozy listening experience to you. Another interesting question about the Wusun people. Are the Wusun or were the Yusun Turkic or not? No, I don't think that they were Turkic. There's no source that would point to the fact that they spoke one of the Turkic languages. It seems as if they used to be semi-nomadic also, and they did reside in the periphery of semi-nomadic people. But don't forget, and that's what I talked about in the Shungno video last year, that the Wusun originally resided in this area, in the Gansu Heishi corridor, basically. And when the Shungno Empire was established, the Wusun were driven out so far that they later appeared in, well, the Yedisu or Zetyusu area between Lake Balkhash and the Tengrikan mountainous region. That's also where they might have come into contact with these guys who resided not just in, but also on the periphery of the Altai Mountains, the Gökturks, the Ashina, which probably then led, as a sort of domino effect, led to the Ashina taking on the tale of Asina, of that she-wolf who saved this wounded boy from death, and then they did something that I would rather not talk about on the stream, and then the wolf got pregnant with 10 kids, with 10 boys, who were half wolf and half human, who then grew up to found their own tribes, their own states, which would kind of explain how these Turkic tribes even came into being. One of them took her name in her honor, called himself Ashina or Asina, and then his descendants founded the Göktürk Empire. Okay, that story is eerily similar to what the Wusun told their own people. So yeah, important for Turkic history, yes. I don't think that they were Turkic, no. I barely talk about the non-Turkic people who, used to reside in these states. I know it's a bit unfair, but it's due to my focus. There are a lot more people, a lot more tribes that I haven't even mentioned so far in the videos or shown on these maps. The Wusun are certainly one of them. I guess it goes without saying for you guys, but you have to keep in mind that, for example, if you take a look at China, right, at the Tang Empire, not every single individual person who lived in this green area was Han Chinese. To the contrary, not every single resident of the Göktürk Empire was not just a Göktürk, but was necessarily belonging to the Turkic culture. And this also applies to many, many other states, of course. It goes without saying, but I just want you to keep that in mind. Okay, then I would say let's go to the next question. By the way, I don't really like how that strange chat box was positioned. Yeah, I'm sorry, it doesn't really work. If you're on YouTube, just take a look at the YouTube chat so you know basically what is going on the right side of the screen. That being said, the next question. According to historical sources, did nomadic Turks like the Gökturks build castles and cities, or, well, did they continue to live in tents until the end? By tents, I guess that follower meant yurt. So did the Gökturks actually make or build settlements, build houses, or did they really stay true to themselves and resided in yurts until their complete downfall? Very interesting question, and the answer is they most likely stayed in yurts, resided in yurts, as long as they resided in, well, let me open that map from the first Göktürk Empire, as long as they stayed in the steppe area, so in that area which was flat, more or less, to make it a bit more simple. And as soon as they resettled to the periphery, for example, in this area, right? Not this area, but this area is very important. It is very likely that they did indeed live in houses, and that these houses, of course, were part of settlements, even of larger cities. We know that from the fact that when the Byzantine or the Eastern Roman diplomat Semalchus, who I have mentioned several times in my older videos, visited the Turks, the Gökturks, with the goal to forge an alliance between this state, between Eastern Roman Empire and the Gökturks. So basically, he traveled all the way from Constantinople to this area. He did not go to the Altai Mountains at first. Instead, he arrived in Sogdia, one of the Sogdian cities, probably Bukhara or Samarkand. That one is unclear in the sources. And in a report that, Semadhus gave the emperor, he mentioned that he was greeted by several Turks, by people who called themselves Turk, and that they desperately wanted to sell him, at a discounted price, of course, as a welcome gift, iron. Now, the Gökturks are, of course, known to have been experts in iron melting, and they were basically blacksmith people, right? Now, I found it very interesting. Now, Semadhus met Istemiapko, the great ruler in the western part of the Göktürk Empire, probably in this area. Maybe in Kyrgyzstan. Maybe at the Altai. That is also unclear. It is known that Semadhus was sent to a mountain called Akta. Akta is the White Mountain, the snowy mountain maybe, the White Mountain. And there he met Istemi, who was sitting on his golden throne. And then they returned. And we know that they were definitely, after their first meeting, somewhere in Kyrgyzstan. And they were again in a city that is not named, unfortunately. And Semadhus made that remark that he saw a lot of, well, statues and art, golden art, within these settlements. And he even said that the culture that these people possess is in no way inferior to what we have back at home in Constantinople, the Greco-Roman art. That is very interesting. So yeah, this is also a nice implication that some Turks did reside in these settlements. Most Göktürk people, most people who belong to the Ashina dynasty, they probably stayed in this area. And it is likely that they did stay in yurts, indeed. This also would apply to the Second Göktürk Empire. Keep in mind that a certain Tonyukuk, who was a military commander and also advisor for the great Bilge Khan, but also for Kapkan, during the Second Göktürk Empire, he explicitly advised Bilge Khan not to build cities. Because he said, once we become sedentary people, like the Chinese, we're going to lose our warrior spirit. But this is what makes us unique. It's the warrior spirit. This is all that we have in this wasteland, in the steppe, basically. We don't have many great fertile areas. We are not really able to build any great monuments or fortifications within the steppe. We can on the periphery, but if we do this on the periphery to China, then it is very likely that they're going to influence us. We would, of course, be influenced by their architecture at first, but as soon as we become sedentary, we could also become prey to their, basically, what he was referring to the work of Chinese agents, of Chinese monks who would try to convert the Turks to their own religion, maybe to Buddhism, who would basically try to Sinicize the Turk. Because they knew very well, indeed, I would say that Tonyukuk was absolutely, he hit the nail on the head, that the Chinese knew that once the Göktürks would lose this warrior spirit, they would be rather easy to conquer. So that's the reason why, until the end, the Göktürks did not build any settlements in the eastern part. If they did rule over other cities, we have to say in fairness, most of these cities they didn't found. They conquered, they annexed, but they weren't the one to found these cities. So yeah, I hope that also answers the question. Göktürks were not fully nomadic, but semi-nomadic to the end. Okay, that's very interesting. I have to point out that that one dude, as he calls himself, is from Chile. He's a Native American, he is a Native American in love with channel is Steppe Culture Fascinating. Thank you very much for watching. Greetings to Chile and also anyone else watching in the Americas right now or in Canada. I think it's like afternoon over there. It's become evening here. I have to say it's still very hot, so that's the reason why the fan is running in the background. You can see it. I hope that you can hear it, certainly, that it's not disturbing in a way. Yeah. Talk about climate change. Okay, interesting question. What does semi-nomadic mean? How is it different from fully nomadic? Very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Nomadic people wander from place to place, and they are always on the lookout for new land that is not fertile for themselves, but fertile enough to feed their own cattle. They bring their families with them. So nomadic people, nomadic tribes, they wander, they migrate together. They basically leave no one behind, and they are always on the lookout for new pasture. Semi-nomadic people do not follow this path. So, as I just said, the Turks were not sedentary, right? They were semi-nomadic. That doesn't mean that they used to wander from place to place each and every day. To the contrary, semi-nomadic people usually had places of residence that they knew would be ideal to settle in, depending on the respective season, depending on the time of year. So for example, if you go to the map, let's take this part because it has rather little written on it. So let's say that the Kyrgyz, for example, they used to reside around in the Baikal area. The Kyrgyz knew, of course, that in winter it would get rather cold, very cold, much more cold than, for example, here, in the south, in the Ordus Plateau, or even in the Orkhon Valley. And in the summer, they knew that this place, that Lake Baikal, would offer a fresh atmosphere. It would be rather cool. You would have temperatures that you could survive in. That would be more pleasant for you and also for your cattle, of course, for your entire family too. So what they did is, in summer, they basically stayed at that place, and during the winter months, they migrated further south. How far further south? It's difficult to track after all these centuries or millennia. But that is basically the way that semi-nomadic people functioned. They would have places of residence, but they would change these residences depending on the time of year. So they were sort of sedentary, right? But just for a short while before they would move again. Fully nomadic people, usually in the Eurasian steppe belt, there weren't even that much fully nomadic people. Honestly, really. Those who were fully nomadic were the ones on the lookout or on the run who would migrate. For example, the Huns. So the people that would create the Hunnic Empire in Europe and in the Caucasus, the Huns of Attila, they used to be semi-nomadic, probably here around the Altai Mountains, the core Turkic tribe, the core tribe. And for some reason, they left this area. And during their migration, they, of course, adhered to a fully nomadic lifestyle. I guess this goes without saying, of course. There were also other fully nomadic people that were not forced to migrate anywhere, who basically roamed within the same area. But we can safely say that this fully nomadic, or this tradition of full pastoral nomadism, was existent in prehistory and antiquity, but basically gone by the Middle Ages. So I just mentioned the Pechenek, right? The Pechenek who would arrive here around 900 AD, and who would, give the great Alexios of the Byzantine Empire a lot of headaches. The Pechenek at that time, they did not build settlements, but they were not fully nomadic either. They were semi-nomadic. And what they did was basically leave their place in the south once summer hit, and then return back to the south of their dominion once winter hit in the north. So that's basically the way they functioned. Of course, it goes without saying that the one disadvantage that both fully and semi-nomadic people had is the fact that because you are forced to leave your settlement area at some point, during the year, it is difficult to store up things. It is difficult to build entire settlements. So there's also the factor that you had to stay mobile, even if you were semi-nomadic, because of the fear that you could be attacked, that you could be raided, that you could be destroyed at any time, especially in this area, which appears vast, and it is vast, it is huge, but it was inhabited by many more tribes that I have not even counted here. So that's also one of the reasons why the Turkic peoples and the Mongolic peoples resided in what we call yurt or ger in Mongolic. Yeah, that's basically it. My answer, of course, is very simplified. So this is not an academic answer, but you wondered, now you know. Oh, right. Regarding the Yurchen, they are basically Manchu people, not Turkic. I'm not an expert regarding Yurchen history. As I said, there is someone who basically I have teamed up with to talk about the pre-Genghis history of Mongolia. I don't know, maybe I'm also going to feature him on my podcast. Maybe I can ask him that question and he can give you the extensive answer in that regard. Oh, we also have a fan or follower from Central Florida. So greetings to Florida. I think it is called the pensioner state, right? Because you have a lot of people, a lot of older people inhabiting basically all of Florida, and then you have a few nice beaches in Miami and so on, or Orlando, I guess. But yeah, I hope you weren't too devastated by the presidential debate between Trump and Biden, by the way. I mean, you others, you guys are living there, so it's not really that much our problem, but sort of is also for the world. Yeah, try not to despair. Another people that I have covered in some videos but never really extensively talked about are the Avar people. So the ones who founded the Avar Khaganate. I'm gonna make something about them eventually, but yeah. Eventually I'm also gonna talk about the Avars, maybe just do a podcast only episode. Interesting case. It really seems that historians still haven't figured out why the Avars were so desperately sought after by the Gökturks. I do have a theory. I'm going to bring it up when the time is ripe. Effie wants to know, is there any reason why Japanese and Korean languages have similarities with Turkic languages? Sultan would say yes, because Hans are Koreans. There is this transurration theory. This is also a question that was asked by someone a few days ago, actually. My take on the transuration theory. So, if I may, let's open up this map again. Okay. The transuration theory says that the ancestors of the Mongols, the Tungus, the Turks, the Koreans, and the Japanese used to reside in the Amur Basin, Northeast Asia, and that around 3000 BC, so about 5,000 years ago, the first people of this area left the original settlement and migrated rather far away, with the first people probably leaving being the group that spoke an early form of Turkic. So basically, the first Turkic group or whatever, the first Turks would have left this area to the west. and then the ancestors of the Koreans and the Japanese would have left to the southeast, the Mongols basically inhabiting the area of the Khingan Mountains, and the Tungus later appearing in Manchuria. And the theory is, or rather, the factors contributing to this theory are that these people share interesting similarities regarding their language, sometimes even regarding names, place names. And I have to say that I'm not as fond of the Trans-Eurasian theory as I used to be 2 years ago, when I even made a video about them. I can actually show you guys. There's a video that I made about a possible Turkish-Japanese, a possible Turkish-Japanese connection or Turkic-Japanese connection over the course of the past few thousand years. And this is when I first got into contact with the Trans-Eurasian theory, which was also hotly debated at that time, which seemingly was debunked by some other researchers or research groups. Although I have to say, in fairness, the one research group that torpedoed that theory basically came from China. So I think all 28 or 29 scholars, just keep that in mind. But it is interesting that Japanese and Turkish, for example, basically have the same syntax structure. So regarding grammar, there are more similarities between Turkish and Japanese, for example, than between Turkish and English, or between Japanese and English, or between Turkish and German, or between, I don't know, Japanese and Hindu. It is not really clear why. I wouldn't say that the Trans-Eurasian theory should be disregarded so easily. I don't think that there's that much evidence for any genetic relations between Turkic and Japanese people, not as far as I know. But yeah, these implications, when we take a look at the respective languages, there are indeed many strange similarities. I don't think that there are too many coincidences throughout history. Then again, we don't really know if any event where a Turkic people and a Japonic people ever met anywhere. We don't have any source for that, so it is a lot of speculation. Regardless, if you're interested in a theory, I would suggest that you take a look at this video, which I'm going to show right now on the screen. It is indeed one of the last videos that I actually narrated. Yeah, it was really fun to make, and for that video specifically, I was able to conduct an interview with Professor Martin Roberts, who then used to work for or at the Institut für Menschheitsgeschichte, Max Planck Institut für Menschheitsgeschichte in Jena, so in Eastern Germany. I think she herself is from Belgium. And yes, she basically explained what this theory would have been about. And what I did was try to paint a bigger picture and use this theory as a way to understand why Turks and Japanese do have similarities. Then again, I only, basically showed the viewer what she said, but in video form, in the form of images and maps and so on. It's a very interesting theory. What I found really funny and entertaining is the fact that whenever, sometimes on Netflix I do watch Korean drama series or comedy series, and in these TV shows, the way that some of the Koreans are talking to each other, it is so similar to the way that Turkish people talk to each other. Same also applies to the Japanese. It's not really something that would be academic, right? It can't be used as evidence for such a huge theory, but yeah, it's a really strange coincidence. It's actually fun to talk about, I guess. So this is one of the topics where I cannot really give a clear answer because I don't really know myself. Okay, so we have a lot of increased activity on the stream. let me just take a quick look. What happened in between the times of the Xianbei and the Ruran? The Ruran have also been covered on this channel a lot. The Xianbei, not so much. So while this video is in the background, the Xianbei were of mixed Turco-Mongol origin, with the Mongol tribes probably being in the majority, and the Ruran, the ruling dynasty of the Ruran Khaganate of the empire, was definitely of Donghu, so of ancient Mongolic origin. What happened in between was basically that the Xianbei state disintegrated this confederation. It never really was an empire with monarchical structures, although they did have a Khan apparently. And what happened was that the Xianbei tribes dissolved and the Ruran empire came in its place, had its center in the Orkhon Valley, had its capital at Ötüken, most likely, and the Xianbei tribes, most of them migrated to the south, interestingly, towards China. And a certain part of them was the so-called Tuoba clan, Tuoba, Tapgach. They created smaller states that were Sinicized over time. So we're right now in late antiquity, right? So 3rd, 4th, 5th century. And while the Ruran were making, they were basically dominating most of the steppe, they dominated basically all Turkic peoples that resided in Central Asia. Meanwhile, the Tuoba Tapgach people of Xianbei descent created Chinese states. They had been Sinicized. They did retain their ancient Xianbei names, titles, even clothing. But yeah, the most important of the Xianbei states was, I would argue, not the Xianbei Confederation in Mongolia, Manchuria, but actually the Wei Empire, Northern Wei Empire in northern China, in Tapgach. So that's basically what happened. Junaid Ahsan would like to know, what is the golden age of Turk? Well, if you mean the Turks in general, I would most certainly argue that the golden age was not the Göktürk period. But it was a period that I haven't really covered on this channel and that we are going to delve into in the near future. I would say that was, well, the High Middle Ages, so the years between 1000 AD and 1200 AD. This was a time where Turkic peoples really dominated almost everything west of the Altai Mountains, east of Hungary, everything in between, where they adhered to several religions, where they integrated several non-Turkic cultures into their own culture to forge a new melting pot, but still with distinct Turkic identities. Where you had so many Turkic peoples doing their own thing. They also fought against each other a lot, of course. But that's part of the Turkic culture. It's really part of our character, I guess, unfortunately. And I would say that the Golden Age, definitely the High Middle Ages, simply for the fact that the Turkic peoples were so influential. Another period that you could count as a golden era certainly were the 1500s, so the age of the gunpowder empires. You had the Ottoman Empire, you had the Safavid Empire in Persia and beyond, you had the Mughal Empire in India, all founded by Turkish people or people of Turkic descent. Sure, but I don't know. I would rather save the High Middle Ages. It was very diverse, decentral, and there was just so much happening. It was also the most important part because once the Mongols arrived, once the Mongol Empire also destroyed many Turkic entities throughout the steppe, while also integrating a lot of Turks into their army, of course, because why not? Turks used to be great warriors. This was the time when most Turkic peoples also decided to basically conform to certain principles that are still active to this day. This especially is, I think, agreeable in the case of the Turkish Turks, or the Turks and Turkic people in Anatolia, and in that realm, especially with the Oghuz Turk people. So I wouldn't say that a dark age would have set in. To the contrary, of course. I mean, that's just when the Ottoman Empire was getting started. But the Golden Era, definitely high Middle Ages. I don't know what you guys think. Everyone has their own opinions, of course. I mean, the Xiongnu Empire was also vast. People are still debating to this day if it used to be Turkic or not. The Göktürk Empire was very large and influential, but it basically came and went and left little traces, which I find very unfortunate. And just having military prowess and geopolitical influence doesn't make an age great, right? The question is, what do you leave for your descendants? The Göktürks didn't really leave that much. Let's be totally frank in that regard. I'm saying this as someone who's written a book about the Göktürks on a bookshelf, who's still trying to, give that last touch to the second book, which is right now 458 pages long, a very large book, very long book actually, about the first Göktürk Empire and everything that was relevant to Göktürk history. They didn't really leave much behind for the afterworld. The other Turkic peoples did, though. There's one Turkic group that also didn't leave that much behind, but that is very important even to this day, even in political discussions. That's the one that you can watch the video of about right now, the Hazars, of course. Yeah. And here it comes, the next question interesting question about the Hazars. What do you think about the Hazar Ashkenazi theory? I pray to God that I'm not gonna get demonetized on this stream for that, but it's a very important question. I'd love to talk about it. So this video that I made about a year ago, it's my most popular video up to this point. And it's also one of the most controversial videos. Not as controversial as the video about the Bulgars recently. And I made this video because I really wanted to know or find out if the Jewish people that appeared in Central and Eastern Europe during and after the Middle Ages were somehow indeed related to the Hazar people. So the K in Khazar is not pronounced, so it's silent. It's called Hazar. And for this, I even got me another great interview with the great Professor Ktipi Bugat. Anyone who has ever been interested in Mongol and Turkic history and steppe history probably knows who I'm talking about right now. There he is. He's a great, not just an asset, he was a great driving force for the past 50 years regarding Turkish and Turkic history, Iranian, Persian history, Mongol history, everything in between. And he wasn't really agreeing with that hypothesis. And a lot of people in the comment section either attacked him directly or indirectly and said that, oh, well, that old geezer, he has no idea what he's talking about. I mean, just look at his name, right? He would be biased personally, which I find a bit unfair to say. And in general, it is kind of strange to think about the fact that once the Hazar Empire was destroyed, that seemingly the people of this Hazar Empire vanished into nothing. I find it rather unlikely. But then again, I don't really even like to go into or enter such discussions because nowadays it is very much politically debated or influenced by political events and processes of the past few years. there were certainly a few people, for example, in Germany and Poland, who had Hazara ancestry. I mean, there are people who, after I made that video, who send me private messages also on social media, even up to this day. Even I think a fan of mine who has been following me for a few years, and they said that they had some DNA tests taken and so on. They know their family's history, and they put one and one together, and they came to the conclusion that their ancestors most likely were Hazara people, and they come from normal Jewish families, not families that descended from or appeared in the Near East, in the Middle East, but in that area, in the Ponto-Caspian area, the Caucasus, in Ukraine. And that doesn't surprise me at all. The question is, were the majority of the Jewish people who lived in Europe before the Second World War, was the majority of Hazara descent or not? Are Jewish people nowadays of Hazara descent or not? Are there other people who are not part of, or do not adhere to Judaism? Are they maybe descendant of the Hazars for some reason? I don't really know. I wouldn't brush it off. It's a very controversial topic. I don't think that Arthur Koestler, German Hungarian, I don't think that Arthur Koestler was seeing things. I don't think that he was making things up. I also find it very unfortunate that, at least in the past, when I typed in Hazar Empire and made a Google search, that I would arrive in places where basically the Hazars themselves, not even the theory, the Ashkenazi Hazar hypothesis, but where the Hazar state itself was deemed anti-Semitic in nature, where anyone who would talk about Turkic Jews or Turkic people that may or may have not been Jewish, that this debate itself would have been anti-Semitic. And I said to myself, how in the world could you come to that conclusion? Because if you just take a look at Hazar history, isolated from anything that came after that, it's a fact that the Hazars were Turkic. They integrated lots of non-Turkic peoples in the area, correct? And it is indeed very likely that at least the elite, and we know that the rulers certainly from a certain point converted to Judaism, and that the Hazar Empire served as a safe place for some Jews who were persecuted in other parts of the world, in the Near East, for example, but also in Southeastern Europe. So yeah, there's that. I really wouldn't discount the Hazars. This is also one of the reasons why, or one of the factors that motivated me to make this video, just to show that the Hazars did exist, that they were Turkic, that they changed over time, that there are certain theories that surround the Hazars, that there is no definitive answer to this question. Yeah. I don't know, I talk a lot on the stream, and that's the point of the stream, but I would really like your opinion. What do you think about this Hazar hypothesis? By the way, what you're seeing right now, this is exactly it. Yeah, this is that website. I don't know. Yeah, okay, it's from the AJC. No surprise there. I mean, just take a look at what they're saying in this article. So in the 6th century CE, the Hazars, an obscure warlike tribe in Turkestan, very obscure, fought for land that was ultimately overtaken by southern Russia and Ukraine. It was overtaken by nobody, actually. No, that's not correct. The Kievan Rus destroyed the Hazars, but so did the Oghuz. The Kievan Rus did not settle at that point in time in the Caucasus. The Oghuz didn't either. So there's that. But the Hazars continued to be mentioned throughout history, especially as one of the first groups to adopt Judaism. Correct. By the 8th or 9th century, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories began forming around the Hazars' reported conversion to Judaism. This spurred anti-Semitic beliefs that they were building a secret empire which sought widespread control through financial gains. I don't know if the wording is the problem. Maybe they didn't mean it that way, but I'm pretty sure that in the 8th or 9th centuries, there were no conspiracy theories of any kind about Hazars controlling financial elites. Like, huh? I mean, I'm sorry, but that's like the period where the Hazar Empire was existing. It was in existence. The Hazars were a real people at that time. Given that the Hazars moved into and settled in Eastern Europe, anti-Semites pushed the conspiracy theory that Ashkenazi Jews, Jews descending from Eastern Europe, are not real Jews, and so on and so forth. This is, of course, a point where I would say, okay, this is a controversial topic, and yeah, I'm not a fan of conspiracy theories at all. But the part before, where they treat the Hazars as a mythical state that may or may not have existed, that kind of made me a bit angry, I have to say. Yeah, you know, I didn't get that point, and I thought to myself, are they trying? That's why I put the meme face there. Are they kind of trying to unmake the Hazar Empire? I leave that up to you. Oh, we have someone from the Karachay Turks, the Caucasus. Welcome, thank you very much. Yeah, I would even indeed, as I said, or as I implied, I would agree that most likely some Hazars moved to Eastern Europe, but that doesn't mean that all Hazars, you know, became the Jews in Central and Eastern Europe. That doesn't mean that all these Jewish people, you know, that the millions of people that were killed during the Holocaust, that all of them used to have Hazar ancestry. It's very difficult because we don't have a lot of data, right, in that regard. So we have to be really careful. I also don't like it when things become too political. I mean, this is history, and I know history is always political to a certain degree. Yeah. I don't want to, or I wouldn't say that I would like to interrupt this live stream, but I would like to take a small break, but stay with you and just give it a little, or make a little advertisement to advertise something that I have also talked about on the community tab and even made a video about, a short video on YouTube. That is indeed my own shop. So the Can't Stand shop, simply called can'tstandshop.com. By the way, the t-shirt that I'm wearing right now is exactly this Ktipi t-shirt that I sort of created. When you go to can'tstandshop.com, you can purchase various articles, mostly, you know, merchandise, apparel that you can wear, like t-shirts and so on, even mugs, even have a mouse pad. That includes some sort of Turkic or Steppe history. Maybe you just like to wear something like that. I mean, I really like this t-shirt. It's very cozy, it's comfortable. Ideal at home. I think it could be cool to, you know, go out and show this shirt in the public, you know, this especially the bust of Ktipi with this nice old Turkic writing. But this is also the place where I offer my first book about the Turks that I talked about, sitting on that shelf. It's just the ebook because I don't have a way to have these books printed and then sent via the shop. So if you want the printed version, you have to go to Amazon. But you can purchase the ebook for 12 US dollars. Those who are members on YouTube and Patreon, by the way, right now, you guys also have direct access to this ebook for free, so you don't have to pay anything. Yeah, this is also where I'm going to offer the ebook version of my second upcoming book. So, you know, just a little nice advertisement for that. Gemini would like to know, you have a German accent. Are you Deutsch Turkey? Yes, Ich bin ein Deutsch-Türke, if you agree that Deutsch-Türke is a nice term. I just said on the stream before. The reason why I keep it in English is because most of my viewers are not from Germany, not from Turkey. So yeah, I mean, English is the language that can bring us all together. Again, greetings to everyone wherever you're watching from right now. I wonder if you have anyone from East Asia watching currently. I guess not. Yeah, it would be like 5 or 6 a.m. in Tokyo. I think people have work to do there. Another question before you go. I gotta go now, but really, who are the Kimeks? Nice question. The Kimeks used to be a tribal confederation that was basically made up of up to 7 tribes or tribal societies. And one of these tribal societies was called Kipchak. So that's where the Kipchak descended from. Another one of these tribes was called Bayundur or Bayandur or Bayandur. Sounds kind of funny. I like the Bayundur pronunciation more. And this Bayundur tribe is the one that later migrated to the south, became part of the Oghuz. Sort of like the Pechenek, or part of the Pechenek became part of the Oghuz, Yapko, of these 24 tribes, as I said before. And that same bracket and that same subgroup as the Pechenek was the Bayundur. So Kimek influence there. Yeah, that's the Kimek Khaganate. It was overtaken by the Kipchak tribe, basically. The Kipchaks, they made their own confederation. Kipchaks are also known as Cumans or Kuman in Europe, especially in Central Europe and Germany. Yeah, but the original name was Kipchak, of course. So yeah, that's the Kimek. Shortest answer so far on the stream. Oh, Jimmy, no biggie. I don't think that the term Deutsch-Türke has that much of a bad connotation. It's just something that I get a lot of comments about. I'm not going to say where they're from, but from people in Germany that say you can't be a German Turk, a Deutsch-Türke. You have to be either Deutsch or Turkish. You have to be German or Turkish. You have to decide for one or the other. We can see throughout history that's not how it works, right? And we live in the 21st century. But Deutsch-Turkic can also mean a certain group of third generation Germans of Turkish origin living in Germany who are perhaps my age or even a bit younger, especially younger, and who are sort of reacting very negatively anytime when they're asked where they are from, where they are really from. This is also very funny actually in Germany. If someone has met you for the first time and they start a conversation with you, and let's say the person you're talking about is a German person. You're not, you're Turkish originated. Your parents are originally Turkish. Sooner or later, they're going to ask, where are you from? And you could say, I'm from Berlin. You're from Munich. Nice to meet you. And then most of the time, they're going to ask, no. Where are you really from? As in, where is your family from? If you refuse to give a honest answer, they're going to ask, well, where are your parents from? And they basically want to hear, are you a Turk or not? Are you of Turkish origins or not? Most of the time when they're asking that question, they already suspect that you might be from Turkey. And that's the point where many younger Turks react negatively. You know, they say like, hey, don't you accept me for what I am? Why do you really need to know the origins of my great-great-grandparents and so on? Just accept me, here as a German or whatever. I'm not someone who would react negatively. I just don't like the connotation to this term. So if anyone asks me where I am really from, or if I understand that they want to know my ethnic origins, I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, I'm the one mostly asking other people who I suspect are foreign born or who are not of German ethnicity. I like to ask them where their families came from, because I'm interested in cultures. And a lot of German people are also interested in foreign cultures. Some of them might ask that question to provoke an answer. And once again, we have been driven into politics, but an interesting question nonetheless. I refuse to talk about private stuff for a long time on this channel, but once you become a public, prominent person, you can't really, prevent that. And also, perhaps it's even a good thing that I'm showing or talking about what I have encountered in my personal private life, just to show some people that it's really me who's making these videos, who's writing the book. The funniest thing that I ever encountered was, for a short period of time, people seemingly of Chinese origin came to watched a video about the Uyghurs, and they didn't like what I was showing, and they suspected me of being part of a large world US-dominated organization, a person who was tasked by that organization to make propaganda videos about the Uyghurs and to spell blatant lies about the Uyghurs. Of course, we're not Turkic at all. That's what they told me. And that was like the funniest thing I ever encountered. But sometimes I also think that's like a very dangerous thing to think or to say. So, yeah. For those of you tuning just in, this map is, I think I just lost the plot, I think. Yeah, this map is depicting Central and Eastern Asia around the year 840 AD. These borders, by the way, they are not final, they may not be precise. I just made that map, I think, at the beginning of this last week, because I was trying to keep track of the changing borders of the Karahanid Empire. Another map that I have from the year, or that depicts the year 1000 AD or 1030 AD, precise, yeah, is this one, for example. So, of course, in the year 1030, there wasn't a, some of these states didn't exist anymore, of course. I didn't fill that out, but I did take care of Central Asia, of Eastern Asia also. This is also very interesting. I gave you a spoiler about the cooperation coming up about Mongolia before Genghis Khan. The Liao state is going to play a crucial role in that video series. There was so much going on, you would think that the Eurasian steppe belt was dominated by large political entities, but as I said like an hour ago, there were so many tribal peoples who also lived semi-autonomously within the state, where you really can't draw precise, exact borders. The most you can do, or the least you can do, however, is try to at least paint the areas where, for example, the Kumans would more often reign over or patrol with their soldiers or conduct raids than, for example, the Hazars. From some sources, you could find out that the Karahanids ruled over Bukhara at that time, while the Ghaznavids, the northernmost that the Ghaznavids got was Kunduz at the Oxus River, at the Ceyhun River, or Amudarya. So yeah, that's where you can definitely draw lines. Something that I didn't figure out, unfortunately, was, for example, the situation in the Tarim Basin, where I knew that the Karahanid had conquered the kingdom of Khotan, for example, but I wasn't really so sure if they gotten the hold until Lulan in the eastern Tarim Basin. So that's basically why I draw the line right here in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, I wish that we really had more sources in that area. It is kind of unfortunate, but it is indeed worthwhile to talk about such topics. The history of the Eurasian steppe belt has been neglected for so long. Here and there you will find or encounter a nice documentary running on BBC an interesting book that was written that you can find all over the world on the bookshelves, or maybe an interesting YouTube video. But I feel like most of the time, this type of media is either too specific or too broad, too simplified. And that's why I started this video series. I know I'm not the first one, but I just wanted to map the rise and the fall and the legacy of every major, important, relevant steppe state or steppe entity. But again, there are a lot of stories also to tell about the Tarim Basin, Tuyun, what the hell was happening in northern China. Goguryeo, of course, should be wrong. Actually, I think a fan pointed that out to me. Goguryeo didn't exist in 840 anymore. The story of Manchuria, for example, I haven't even opened up that book, but I'm going to leave that to the experts. That's basically where my wisdom or knowledge ends in East Asia. Someone is asking, sen yayında değil miydin Eren Karakoç'ta? Yok, ben o yayında değildim. At least I think that I wasn't. Eren Karakoç is an interesting historian. He's specialized on Turkish and Turkic history, and I think he's gotten quite prominent in Turkey. I think that in one of the live streams, I think he was talking about something that I posted on Twitter. I didn't really watch it thoroughly, but I haven't been featured on his live stream or podcast so far. It's very interesting. He's indeed very open about his own beliefs, his political beliefs, but he's generally very honest in what he says. I appreciate that very much. There are some other Turkish historians who, whose papers, whose books, whose videos are really worth watching, listening to, reading. There are also some Turkish historians, most of them you see on TV, who just don't get it, in my frank opinion, but yeah, let's not dive into that topic. I think Karakoç, I really like that gentleman. Jamila would like to know, Idikut Uyghurs and Heshi Uyghurs, what separates them? Interesting question. So the Idikut and the Heshi Uyghurs were remnants of the great Uyghur Khaganate. I explained that once the Uyghur Khaganate fell, most of the Uyghurs wandered southwards or even to the west. Some Uyghurs even appeared on the eastern periphery of the Karahanid Empire, here in Kyrgyzstan, settled there. But most of them, apparently, basically took over important city-states along the Silk Road, including Karahoja, Turfan, even up to Kucha. That's where they basically met and also, I think, clashed with the Karahanids. What separated them is that, I hope I'm not mixing it up, but that the Idikut Uyghurs were influenced by Manichaeism and Buddhism, and that the Heshi Uyghurs had become fully Buddhist people, basically. Another term for the Heshi Uyghurs is actually Gansu Uyghurs, because they used to settle in and around Gansu province. This is also a mistake on this map, of course, because as you can see, Gansu has been painted with the green color, which is supposed to depict the Tang Empire, which also at that point didn't exist anymore. Again, I haven't really taken care of that part for this time period in 1030 AD. I think the Song Empire was reigning supreme there. But yeah, very interesting history. This is also the part where the Uyghurs became basically sedentary. I mean, they left most of their nomadic traditions completely behind. Yes, someone would like to know, where is Ceyhun and Seyhun rivers? Ceyhun and Seyhun is right there. I don't know if you can see it. They're basically, yeah. So this is the Ceyhun, the Oxus, and this is the Yakartes, the Sehun. Another name for the Ceyhun would be Amudarya. Another name for the Sehun would be Sırdarya. And there's actually a map that I would like to reopen from the beginning, because in 581 you can clearly see that it was the Ceyhun, the Amudarya, the Oxus, that separated the Sasanian Empire from the Göktürk Empire. It's one of the most natural borders in the region. It's also what separated the Karahanid Empire from the Ghaznavid Empire much later. Very important. One of the most fascinating places for me personally, I haven't been there yet, is of course Bukhara or Bukhara in Uzbekistan. Places that might have not been founded by Turkic peoples, but entered a sort of Renaissance period during Turkic reign, indeed, which were of course unfortunately destroyed once the Mongols arrived under Genghis Khan, where they wreaked havoc basically. That region, the Fergana region also, up to Kyrgyzstan, it never really recovered after the Mongol conquests. So also is, I would argue, is the time period, or the time stamp from which in general the Turkic and non-Turkic people in this area did not lose importance, but certainly lost might, military might, political influence, and so on. It's a controversial topic, of course. I know that a lot of people also following me, actually, and a lot of Turkish people are very, very keen on the Mongol Empire and the Mongols in general because they are so fascinated by them. I am too. But you can clearly see that there are distinctions between Turkic peoples and Mongol peoples. And if you take a look at what the Mongol Empire did in Central Asia, I mean, other states also wreaked havoc, but within that short period of time, they basically crushed these city-states and did a lot of damage to these Turkic peoples indeed. Okay, so there is, so that's an interesting question. Are there still Ashinas left? Ashinas. I think it's time that I show something else than just a map. The Ashina is the ruling dynasty of the Göktürk Empire. I just said that in 745, the Second Göktürk Empire was destroyed by a coalition of who else? Turkic peoples. And that doesn't mean, of course, that the Ashina people suddenly vanished. Just like when the Hazara Empire was destroyed, its inhabitants, ruling dynasty, didn't disappear. Most likely, they were not, or not all of them were killed in action or as retribution. But there are very few sources that would point to remnants of the Ashina surviving anywhere. There are certain people in China who you can judge by their name and the name of their ancestors, probably descended from Ashina people, because a part of the Ashina migrated into China, fleeing from the Uyghurs, who created the new state and centered around Ötüken in the Orhan Valley, and the Ashina were basically integrated into Chinese society. We don't really know what happened in the centuries after, but Chinese sources, even in the High Middle Ages and beyond, noted that these and these groups with these and these specific names descended from the original Ashina Turks. So there's that group. There also is a case of a military slave, a Mamluk, so to say, appearing in the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasids, of course, being the successors to the Umayyad Caliphate. And one of these slaves was a Turk who was coming in from Turkestan. And he was so successful that the Abbasid Caliph gave him the title Governor of Egypt for like I think, 10 years. And interestingly, his name was Ashinas. Ashinas. That's written in a Arab and a Persian source. And it is said that the name Ashinas, or there is a theory by a scholar that Ashinas would be some sort of Middle Persian, which would mean as much as, oh, I don't know where that name comes from. I have no idea what it means. As in, what is that name? Ashinas, of course, sounds very similar to Ashina. And we know, the sources say, that this man, this guy, this soldier who became governor, came from Turk lands. Maybe he did indeed descend from the Ashina dynasty. The only problem is that the story took place in the middle of the 9th century. That's like 100 years after the fall of the Gökturks. And at that point, even the Uyghurs had been destroyed, and the Kyrgyz now took over. So did really over such a long period of time, Ashina people, Ashina families survive with only one member of the Ashina dynasty having been, guest starring basically in these sources, and that's like the only one of these groups. Would it be really realistic for a single individual to carry that name while none of his relatives were alive anymore, existed? I hope I'm not making it too convoluted, but it's a very strange story. But again, Ashinas is basically the same as Ashina. Maybe he did come from the Göktürk lands. I don't know. Yes, very interesting. The Sumerian or Sumerian, no, Sumerian, the Sumerian or the Sumer, the ancient culture of Sumer has often been connected to ancient Turkish culture. And there's the theory that Tengri and Dingir, an ancient god of the Sumerians, would have been the same kind of mythical heavenly entity. There are also similarities between certain word roots in the Sumerian language and the Turkic languages. I have to say that most of the time, actually, in all the time, actually, these are just coincidences. There was one theory that I read a long time ago that claims that the Ashina, because the rulers of the Gökturks, Bumin, Istemi, this guy, by the way, you see on the screen, is supposed to depict Istemi. I made that with AI like half a year ago, or 1 year ago. There's a theory that the Ashina actually did not descend from any other Turkic peoples in East Asia, but they actually came from the Near East, that they left the ancient land of Sumer, and then basically, let me show that on a map, basically migrated all the way up through Iranian or Iranic Persian lands. So basically from this place, right, that the Ashina would have migrated all the way up to the Altai Mountains and then settled there. Taking into account that one Chinese source indeed speaks of the Ashina coming from the West Sea, which could have been identified with the Hazar Sea or the Caspian Sea as it's commonly known. I don't agree with that assertion. I would rather argue that the West Sea in a Chinese source would be the Balkhash, Lake Balkhash. Yeah, that's like a absolutely crazy story, but I read it in some internet forum a long time ago, but it actually got quite a following back then, before it died off, because many rulers of the Gökturks, of the first Göktürk Empire, they carry names that do not appear to be Turkic in origin. Bumin, Istemi, Taspar, Mukhan, or Mukhan. Also titles that became names like Ishbara, and so on and so forth. Tonyukuk, even in the Second Empire. That really isn't any evidence for me, though, to connect Turkic people of any kind with the ancient Sumer culture. Yeah, by the way, I don't know who Parsifal is, but yeah, I'm a German Turk, but I'm here to talk about history and most of the time ancient and Middle Eastern, no, God forbid, and medieval history. It's not political, so if you just want to make fun of Turks streaming from Germany, you can, but there are also Turks streaming from Turkey, so I don't really see the problem. I don't really know. I mean, I can basically see the this chat on my software that I use, but I don't even know how many people are watching right now. So let me just quickly take a look. Well, about 40 apparently. Interesting. Hmm. It's okay if you're joking, but you know, this is like one of the things, like I just said before. If you repeat those jokes over and over again, people are gonna be pissed off at some point in time, sooner or later. So I also don't appreciate those kind of jokes, and I'm like one of the first people who would make fun of myself or my origin or other Gurbetçi, Deutsch-Türken, whatever you want to call them. But you know, you have to know when enough is enough. And it's especially concerning when it's people who make these jokes and may also have rather negative opinions about the kind of people that they're making jokes about. I also find it funny. This is not about this person, of course, about other people who make these jokes, and once they get strong reactions by Turkish people, they pedal back saying, "No, no, no, it was just a joke, or I was sarcastic or ironic or whatever. I didn't mean it." Yeah, I hope they don't. Someone has written something in, I think, Japanese letters. I'm gonna translate it just now. Do your best. Well, thank you. I will. I am. Oh. A question by Ali. I believe there's a connection between Turkey and Turk. What do you think? So the Turkey are a people that were mentioned in a Greek source, supposedly living somewhere in this area, in the Caucasus. There's like one sentence, that one line in that source, no further explanation given. I don't think that the Turkey were a Turkic people at that time, simply because the term Turk did not exist anywhere in the world before the first Chinese source mentioned the Turk living in or at the Altai Mountains, so the Göktürk, the Ashina Turk people. I am still convinced to this day that it was the Göktürk who gave other Turkic peoples basically their name, maybe not even voluntarily. Um, but there were certainly other Turkic peoples already in these areas. I just don't think that the Turkey mentioned here were a Turkic people. There is no evidence so far, and this is what makes a Turkic people, like I said. The most important thing, the most common trait, is that members of the society would speak one of the Turkic languages. So far, there has been no evidence found for anyone in this area in very ancient times speaking a Turkic language. Maybe there was a group, who for some reason migrated very far away, even during the Shungnu Empire or before the Shungnu Empire, migrated into this area, maybe did speak Turkic, but perhaps this information got lost in time, but that is like pure speculation. So I don't think that there's a real connection. Oh, an interesting question by Nuket Yavuz. I have a question. Why don't you consider the Hungarians Turks? Some of them consider themselves Turk. Just curiosity. This was one of the most fun videos to make, the video about the Magyars, or Magyars, as they say in English, about the ancient Hungarians. I don't consider Hungarians to be Turk, or Magyars to have been Turkic, Turkish, because they didn't speak a Turkic language. Again, this is like one of the most important factors. Genetically, there is some overlap between the Magyars, even modern-day Hungarians, and Central Asian people, especially Turkic people, certainly. But this is also the case with some other groups in Central and rather Eastern, Southeastern Europe. The Hungarians certainly were influenced by Turkic and Turkish cultures in their surroundings. We can even see from their vocabulary. But they still had their distinct identity. Now, I'm not really sure if it's appropriate to say that the Magyars would have been part of this Finno-Ugric culture. I did mention that theory in the video. I saw that a lot of Hungarians subjected to that, even more than Hungarians subjecting to the Turkic theory or Central Asian theory. There's also the factor of the summations, which I didn't even mention in the video, unfortunately, due to time constraints. And then, of course, there's the question: are the Hungarians descendant of the Huns? The Turkic factor over the centuries was cultural influence, political influence, rather little influence regarding the language, except for, taking in some Turkic loanwords, basically. But yeah, their language is not Turkic, probably has never been Turkic. The Hungarian runes, this runic script, is of course another implication, because you guys know that the Gökturks also used a script that is or looks similar to the Germanic runes used in Scandinavia and beyond. But yeah, it's also not, it might have evolved out of the Orthon script indeed, but again, the language that was used when writing in the old Hungarian script was not a Turkic language. You can see from the grammar, you can see from basic vocabulary. So yeah, I don't think that the Hungarians or ancient Hungarians were Turkic. Were they influenced by Turkic people? Certainly. Will you make a video about Yakut and North Americans? Yes, actually yes. But not a video just dedicated to North Americans, but rather take a look at the theory of the ancient or the native North Americans, Native Americans, descending from Central and Eastern Asia, which I think should be accepted by now, even in academic circles. But the question, how far back we can trace them, and if really at least a part of the Native Americans resided at the Altai Mountains. Again, we always come back to the Altai Mountain area. And in the video, I want to take a look at how important the Altai Mountains were in general throughout history. And there I would perhaps start with this theory of the Native Americans, but also take a look at the Hephthalites, the Kittites, the Huna people in Central Asia, of course at the Xiongnu and the Gökturks, which I have covered to death on this channel. So I'm definitely gonna, delve into Native American history there. The Yakut or Saka people, maybe make a video later on about them, not in the near future. We have, I think, I would like to answer one more question. Why did the Turkic people migrate in general? That's a very good question. I mean, that's a question that, if you go to Google searches or Google Trends, you will find that a lot of people are asking this question. They want to find out, why did Turkic peoples in general appear in Europe, in other parts of Asia, in the Near East? What you have to keep in mind, or what we have to keep in mind, is that this wasn't the first state, Turkic state, in history. It was the biggest and one of the most, if not the most important Turkic state, and that it was a catalyst for migration of Turkic tribes, which went rather slowly. And you can see on the map here that I have highlighted this land and given that to the Onogor, so the Ogur 10 tribal federation, with a bunch of tribal names, including the Bulgars, of course, or even the Alans, which is still debated whether they were Turkic or not. Before the Gökturks, Turkic people had already arrived in this area, but the first catalyst that drove Turkic people, for example, to the west, to Europe, was of course the Hunnic Empire, of which unfortunately I don't have a map right now, I think. The second catalyst, or the second event, was the creation of the Göktürk Empire, which allowed people within this realm to roam freely and rather, with in a safe environment, sort of like the Pax Mongolica after Genghis Khan in the Mongol Empire was. And there was another event which I have mentioned several times now, and that was the fall of the Second Göktürk Empire. And this is the one, this is like the timestamp where a lot of Turkic tribes migrated completely away from this area, from Eastern and from even Central Asia, into Europe, into Eurasia basically, and slowly into the Near East. And the last event that was important for the migration of the Turkic peoples was, of course, the creation, the foundation of the Selçuk Sultanate, the Selçuk Empire. Let me just open that map quickly. It's the last map for today. Well, it's not there yet. Okay. There it is, I think, right? Yes. And of course, if you take a look at the map, forget Europe, forget the rest. This is what I have mapped completely. And of course, the migration of the Selçuk, of the Kınık tribe, of the Oğuz Yapgu state that we have talked about extensively tonight, away from the Oğuz land, basically destroying the Ghaznavid Empire in the process, destroying a bunch of states, city-states, annexing them in the process, reaching as far as Central Anatolia, even Western Anatolia, and basically opening up a century-long conflict with the Byzantine, with the Eastern Roman Empire. In the process, also triggering the Crusades, basically. I mean, the Crusades were triggered because the Selçuk rulers arrived in Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and initiated a small local conflict, which was reason enough for Christian crusaders to finally drive off the Muslims, but what they really had in mind was drive off the Turks from that area. And each time one of these states is formed or is destroyed, the tribes and the societies within these states migrate away, often because in the aftermath they have to live in fear. They become victims of raids of foreign invasions, of course. I mean, I haven't even talked about the Chinese conquest of the Gökturks, of the First and the Second Göktürk Empire. And this made many Turkic people drive away. That being said, Turk people also migrated away in the first place due to environmental reasons. I said before in the stream that semi-nomadic people are always, or nomadic people are always on the lookout for pasture for their cattle. What happens when due to environmental factors, the area that a nomadic group has been settled or has been roaming in for like 200 years suddenly, loses its fertility, becomes devastated ground, so to say. What if an area that used to be cool and fresh becomes very warm and arid? You can't cultivate your cattle anymore, your herd. You can't feed your families anymore. You have to go out. You have to leave that area, find some other place that is more fertile. That is also a reason why in the background there were always Turkic people migrating away. This doesn't have to do anything with the Turkic peoples themselves, with the Turks themselves. It's not a cultural thing. The same would have happened if the Turks would have stayed in this part of the globe, and if for some reason the Mongolic people would have made this their ruling ground, their dominion, they would have behaved the exact same way. A lot of times, steppe peoples were massively influenced by environmental factors. It is even said that the Göktürk empires, both the first and the second one, might have been created after a period of economic distress where even, I know I've read a report of a Chinese traveler who entered Turkic land and said that in the part where the Dokuz Oğuz were residing, that he only found malnourished people who didn't have anything to eat, where the water reserves had been dried up due to extremely strong, extremely hot weather and very little rain over the months. This was just, I think, 2 years before the Second Göktürk Empire evolved. A people that were in captivity in Chinese lands, well, they basically couldn't feed themselves, and what they said was, we have to get out of here, we have to leave this area, maybe go back to the Ordovan, maybe go back to the Altai. We can only do so if we become politically independent, then we can decide where to go by ourselves. Nobody could stop us, except by the sword, I guess. And this is exactly what happened, and this is the reason why many of these groups formed in the first place. This is true for the Oghuz, this is true for the Karahanid, the Karluk, this is true for the Kimek or the Kipchak. This is like one of the most important reasons actually why Turkic people migrated. They were forced to. I don't think that they were adventurous in the modern sense, right? They were not colonizers. Maybe they were interested to find out, okay, what's behind the horizon? But if you only see the vast flat steppe ahead of you, it's unlikely that you would suspect that behind the horizon some interesting place would pop up. So you stay where you are, unless you're being forced out, whether by the environment or by other states, by conflicts. I hope that this was to your satisfaction. I thank you very much for joining this live stream. This was the first in, I hope, a series of mini live streams. I haven't yet figured out how to go live on Twitch, but YouTube is the most important platform to me. I think that right now you can also watch my, be part of the live stream on Twitter, on X. Be sure to check out my social handles. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I also have a Discord server, which I'm going to advertise the next time. So I think we have around 80 members on that server. It's by invitation, but you can join us then in the near future, take part in these live discussions, funny discussions also. And aside from that, thank you very much for joining. I hope that you have a nice day or evening or night, wherever you are. I hope that you're not as impacted by the heat as I am, or we are here currently in Central Europe. Yeah, was a lot of fun. So thank you very much. See you soon. Take care.